have to find somebody. We have to speak to somebody about this. And we looked at various meetings, and there was one by Dr. Tilkunath at the MRC in Edinburgh. He was doing a stem cell talk, and I stood up at the end, and I didn't want to. I stood up at the end, and I said, why are we not using the smell of Parkinson's to diagnose it earlier? Total silence. Well, hello. It's lovely to see you all this afternoon, but you must be thinking, why on earth is a 75-year-old retired nurse going to speak to you at a thinking digital conference? Well, you should be glad I'm not asking you to look at my computer or my Wi-Fi, because it's an absolute mess. But as Herb mentioned, I have a superpower. And it started when I was a 6.5-year-old girl. Realization. It's really quite funny how you realize things. I'm standing in my grandmother's kitchen, and I stamp my foot, I throw my school bag down. I hate my friends. They smell. They absolutely smell. Now, I did say she was Scottish. I know you can't be saying that. That's no nice. I'll tell you all about it. The women in the family hae the nose. I thought, what? Oh, and I suppose you have a wee bit of colour with it. And off she went. And in literally a few seconds, she had told me I had hyperosmia and synesthesia. She was right. She helped me, like her mother had helped her, and her grandmother, program my nose. Now, nobody knew about this hyperosmia, coupled with synesthesia. But I was to learn from her, the human brain's capacity to learn. I adapted and modified my behavior because I had to. It wasn't tolerable at that time to be stamping your feet and calling your friends, smelly. And on that basis of this experience and feedback I had, I grew quite adventurous. I really liked it. There was this distributed colour, and I had an olfaction network. But I could not have any cognitive bias to what the nose told me. It was quite separate from me. I could not just assume what it was telling me. I had to work it out. So when I was 16, I met my future husband. We were at school together, and he was going to do medicine, and I was going to do nursing. But around about the age of 31, 32, his smell changed. His smell had been wonderful, a really lovely male musk smell, and it changed. And it took a few weeks before I really had to stop saying he was smelling. He wasn't showering. And he was really upset. So we let it go. But when he was 43, 44, he realized there was something wrong. He went to a neurologist, and he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He had to retire when he was 50 as an anaesthetist because he didn't feel he was safe by then. And we went to our first Parkinson's meeting. It was quite amazing. I walked in the door. I spoke to the woman who was selling the raffle tickets. She had Parkinson's, definitely. I turned round. This gentleman was taking off his coat. I lied. I made an excuse. I walked out the door, went to the toilet, and with my head on the wall, remembering my grandmother told me I must tell nobody about this, nobody at all. I said, what am I going to do now? I went back into the room, and within an hour, when we left, I knew every single person who had Parkinson's in that room and every person who didn't. When we got home, I told him about the smell, about how we had our disagreements about it, and he had reverted to the old doctor again. He said, you realise what we've found? We have to find somebody. We have to speak to somebody about this. And we looked at various meetings, and there was one by Dr. Tilkunath at the MRC in Edinburgh. He was doing a stem cell talk, and I stood up at the end, and didn't want to. I stood up at the end and then I said, why are we not using the smell of Parkinson's to diagnose it earlier? Total silence. I wish I'd had a camera to take Thilo's picture because his face was absolutely amazing. Thilo introduced me to Professor Perdita Barn, and Perdy and him put together a proof of concept. Now, they decided to use T-shirt, 6 controls, 6 people who had Parkinson's, and I thought, yeah, 12 T-shirts, that'll be fine. They had to wear them for 24 hours, they hadn't to wash, they hadn't to put any perfume on, and they were to give them back to Thilo. But lo and behold, Perdy decided, oh, well, it's the back of the neck, let's just put it in 2. So I didn't get 12 samples, I got 24 samples. So here are our 6 controls, 6 people with Parkinson's, and I got them all right, except 1. Now, Thilo said to me, no, you're wrong, that person doesn't have Parkinson's. I said, well, we'll see. We'll see. And I said to him, yeah, well, okay, I'll put the 2 separate halves that are all over this table, I'll put them back together again. I'll put the people back together again. And I did it, 100%. 4 months later, this man turns up and says, what did she say about my T-shirt? Well, actually, he said, she said I had Parkinson's, didn't she? I've just been diagnosed. So I was right. So I'm going to speak about something. I'm now involved with TRAPCAF, Transforming Parkinson's Care in Africa. And it has taken 16 years for Professor Richard Walker to put this together with Professor Ndidi Ngobo, yes, and Natasha Fothingill-Misba. It is the most wonderful project. It is absolutely everything that has not happened in the past 100 years with Parkinson's. They're doing multiple studies, combining blood, sebum, sweat, and it's wonderful to be on board with them. They're using our test. It's lovely. But I'm also involved with something that is in Parkinson's, and they have done a film about it, is the hidden aspect. Nobody speaks about the fact they have Parkinson's. They're frightened to speak about it. They don't like it. However, we've put together and designed a set of slides at the MRC, and I'm part of this exchanges, inspiring Parkinson's conversations. And it is wonderful to see people sit. It is, it's for doctors, nurses, people with Parkinson's, groups of people with Parkinson's, and most of all, they can speak to their partner and their family. Now I'm going to introduce Dr. Drupad Trivedi, our analyst on the work that we're doing, and he's going to tell you about replicating Joy's notes.
Thank you. So when we decided we'll do a dual talk, Herb said it's unconventional. It's normally one person, and we like it that way. But then we thought, this is very unconventional. You don't go about sniffing people. But here we are. So why did we decide to replicate Joy's nose, and why is the interest there? Because what Joy did with the T-shirts, to her, it's like, I could do it anyway. I knew it was right. But to a curious scientist's mind, that's something we don't understand. It's something that triggers your curiosity. And that's what led me to think, this is something I want to pursue. So when we did the T-shirt test, I was just a postdoctoral scientist. And if anyone who is familiar with academia in this room knows that you say yes to every project that comes your way. You never say no. And that's exactly what happened. I used to work on the techniques I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. And I used to look at small organisms. I used to be fascinated by how our human body works. This was completely new, which kind of piqued my curiosity. So after the T-shirt test, when I developed the method, I was curious, where else can we apply this? We had to figure out, where is the smell coming from? And the smell was in sebum. Sebum is something we are loaded with when we are born. The vernix that we are covered in when we are born, it's sebum. We have it on our head as well when we've got the cradle cap. So it stays as a baby on us. We slowly lose it, but we gain it back when we get our pimples in teenage. Once you are past that phase, we don't really pay attention to it. The reason I wanted to pay attention to this was Joy mentioned something very unique. She said the smell lingers. And if anyone has got babies in this room, you know that when you smell their clothes, you can smell your baby in it. If you've lost a grandparent, you smell the sofa or the couch they used to sit on, you can still smell them on that couch. Which means the smell, if it's coming from the body, it's embedded into something that kind of preserves it. It's produced in this sebaceous gland that I'm showing by a black arrow. It's in our skin, it's in one of the layers of our skin. When the cells break, they generally become a liquid and they come out on our skin. If the pores are blocked, that's when you get infection and you get pimples. How do we do the sebum sampling? It's pretty simple because Joy told us where the smell is. It's at the back of your neck. So we sample a 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter area at the back of the neck with something very simple, a medical gauze that you might put on a wound dressing. We rub it like it was a t-shirt. We had to find another way to show that everything we would do would be green. So we move on to a smaller cotton surface, and this is a Q-tip, something we use to clean our ears after shower, or something you might have seen in CSI when they take a swab. Then we use Joy, and we use something called a mass spectrometer. Mass spectrometer measures the mass of chemicals, so we can tell how much something weighs in the sebum. The Q-tip has got the sebum in it with any smelly component attached to it. And Joy obviously can smell it. The chemicals are separated, you weigh different masses, and what you see in the middle panel, the blue panel, is how a peak would look. We use AI and machine learning to try and make sense of this signal and see what's so different. So typically, say if I was to do one sample, it takes me 30 minutes to look at one sample, but I'm going to look at about 400 to 800 things. And I have to find that 1 or 10 things that are smelly or that might be associated with a disease. That's where Joy comes in. The sample literally gets split. Half the sample goes into chemistry where we measure the mass. The other half goes to Joy's nose. So now what Joy is doing is she's describing the smell of chemicals as I'm measuring them. She can point out the exact time where the smelly chemical for Parkinson or disease hits her nose. So now I'm not looking to the entire data. I don't need machine learning. I don't need AI. I could just look into a very tiny frame of my data because I'm interested in the smell. And that reduces my time from 30 to 3 minutes. Now I'm not looking at 400 things. I'm only interested in that small window, which might have 4 to 10 features that I'm interested in. So when we did this, I published this paper in 2019. The graph there shows that up until that point, when you look up for papers of sebum studies, it was flat line. No one was looking at it. If you look at the gray line after 2019, it spikes up. That's when we told the story that sebum is something that's also associated with the smell of Parkinson. But not only is it associated, you can actually measure the smell. You can measure what's causing the smell, and you can measure what's changing. And something really nice happened at this point. We came across Apopo. They're used to training giant pouch rats in Africa to smell landmines. So meet Kennedy. So Kennedy is wearing a nice little red jacket. It's got a tiny bell that you can't really see. But when Kennedy detects a landmine, it's going to tug on that jacket and make that bell ring to say, I can smell the smell I'm trained to smell. The rats were so good that they sniffed out most of the landmines, and there's literally no job for them now. So what they've done is they've repurposed them, and the rats know that they would be redundant, so they've taken up a new role to smell TB. So after COVID-19, me and Joy went to Tanzania, and we have got Kennedy in our hands. And what we did was we said, what does Kennedy smell? And Kennedy smells something called sputum. It's something you produce from your lungs. So if you've got a nasty cold, you know when it comes up. It's not your saliva, it's not the watery part that you spit, it's something that you actually bring up from your lungs. That particular biofluid is given to the rats, and they can smell the volatiles, that can smell the things that are coming and smelly, and say, I'll tug it because it smells like TB, or I won't do anything because it's just a normal sputum sample. But obviously, Joy being Joy, she doesn't need as much training as rats. What Joy did was amazing because she didn't just say, this is TB, this is not TB at about 70-75% rate. Every time she told TB, she was able to say, it's not one smell, I'm smelling 4 smells of TB. So when you look back at the data, each smell associated with the amount of bacteria that was present in that person's lung. So to Joy's nose, low amount of bacteria is one smell, medium amount is the second one, and a really bad amount of bacteria is the third smell. She has 4 different levels of TB smell. Rats don't have it. But this was something in Tanzania, and we thought, okay, we'll do something even more fascinating. Let's take her back and let's get more samples in Manchester, because science needs tons of samples. It doesn't work with small numbers. So rats are now smelling sputum samples, and Joy is smelling exactly same person's sebum sample. So sputum is something that comes from lung. Sebum is right at the back, a simple swab. Rats were trained on thousands of sputum samples. That's their job. They do it for the living. For Joy, we just gave her 24 samples and said, train yourself again, because it's been a while since Tanzania. Just familiarize with the smell of TB. Astonishingly, our hit rate was 80%. So what was happening was, when rats said, this sputum smells like TB, in 80% of those people, Joy also said, I can smell TB on the skin. So if there were 100 people in this room with TB, Joy would pick out 80 of them, saying, you have got TB just by smelling the skin. A simple skin swab, nothing to bring up from the chest. Why is it important? Because TB spreads from kids. Kids who get TB don't get diagnosed well. All our gold standard methods are based on sputum sample. Kids can't make sputum samples. If you've got HIV, if you've got other comorbidities, you can't bring up those samples. They're infectious as well. So most of these people get missed, and they keep spreading TB, and that is never going to stop, because we don't have the sample on which our tests are based. But a skin swab is very simple. Even the rat could smell it, probably. Based on Joy's description of 4 smells, what happened is Apopo was able to change their method in which they trained the rats. Because now they know that they don't have to train the rats on the smallest amount of bacterial load, which is what they used to do. Now they know that if the bacterial load increases, the rat is not going to smell the smell, because now that smell has changed. So now in the training, they embedded all the big spectrum of bacterial load to train the rats. So now rats are training on all the 4 smells rather than the first smell, which improved their sensitivity and specificity from 81 and 78 to 99.7 and 96%. So now rats are not missing out any TB samples. They're doing much better. So far, they've already saved about 326,000 people because they would go undiagnosed in TB clinics. So now with this specificity, we are hoping that this even increases, which means rats can help basically slow down the spread of TB. But that's rat's story. What is our vision of sebum? What do I want to do? What does Joy want to do? If we had one of the tricorders, we could easily replicate Joy's nose. But from 100 years from now, the dream is when Joy's smell wouldn't be there, this story probably would be lost. Probably our papers would be buried in some digital archive. People would have these sensors to detect the diseases before they start happening. So the chemistry could have happened without Joy, but chemistry is happening faster and better with Joy. Thank you very much.
It always amazes me when I hear the story again, even though I've heard it now at least a few times. But so when was did you say the original paper on this research, when was that published?
2019.
2019. So prior to that, was this basically a non-existent field of research?
Yes and no. So people did study sebum,
Yeah.
but for things like dermatitis, for eczema, for skin diseases,
Yeah.
People were interested from cosmetic point of view.
Yeah.
So sebum has been studied.
Sure, but for totally different.
But not to do with diseases that happen
Yeah.
on non-skin basis.
Yeah, and I think I was asking before, is like, why? Because it used to be a field of study, is that right? And then it stopped?
Sorry?
This area used to actually be, did other people study it before in terms of trying to use odor to detect disease, or?
Well, let's say yes. Avicenna, Hippocrates, they said that the best thing a physician can have is a nose.
Yeah.
And along came Francis Bacon in the Renaissance and said, it's an animal instinct. Humans shouldn't be using it.
Right.
So,
and as far as you can tell, that one person stopped the use of odor in medicine.
Yes.
Wow, amazing. I guess the natural question is, I guess, what's next for this? I mean, is this something that you're planning to try to digitize onto, I mean, obviously you mentioned about this idea about the tricorder and things like that. Is that next? Is that what's next for you guys, or?
I'm in the phase of recruiting at least 10 more super smellers, or people who think they are like Joy, because we want them to tell us if they smell the same thing.
Wow.
Once
Okay.
we have that proof, we have reason to believe that these things have an associated smell, and people believe it's got associated smell. And then the next step is to make them digitize noses, because then you don't need 10 people, you don't need to go them,
Right.
send them to Africa.
Okay.
You can make sensors that are easy enough to transfer.
So first step is to recruit an army of joys around the world.
Yeah, so the dream is to have Hogwarts of our own, and Joy
Yeah.
could be the one leading that.
Yeah.
So.
That'd be awesome. Olfactory Avengers or something like that.
Definitely.
Well, hopefully we can get you a cool suit or something like that to lead your army. And then next step is once that'll help. I guess the major point of that is really to help validate the research, which would then lead to potential exploitation, commercially or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, it's that this can then actually be then, if you will, duplicated in technology, and in a sense, Joy's nose will become immortal at that point.
We have evidence that there are smells with lots of diseases. So we want to have Joy's nose that can do lots of diseases rather than focus on just one.
Wow. And just for you, I mean, on a personal level, I mean, whenever you go anywhere, you must be smelling various things about people around me, and you're giving me a weird look. Is there anything that you smell off me?
No, I have signed a disclosure. Legally, I cannot do it.
Right.
But one example is a few months ago, a woman stretching over me in Marks and Spencer's, and my mind said, well, I hope the hell they're still treating her for her cancer. And I turned round, and she was losing her hair.
Yeah.
And, I have to walk away.
Yeah.
And
God.
that's hard.
What a burden, indeed. Well, let's hope you are successful, because it's incredibly exciting what's happening here. And congratulations to you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.